What authorizes religious truth? Islam, like every other religion born before the modern era, faces a challenge in the modern world. There has been a sea change in how humans understand authority. Modernity has relocated ultimate authority away from God or traditions rooted in some sense of the transcendence and to humans. The result in the modern West was the relatively rapid disenfranchisement of religious institutions, what in the U.S. is called the separation of church and state. It also disempowered religious leaders relative to emerging secular sources of authority, such as commercial leaders, government bureaucrats, the press, the entertainment industry, scientists, and the educational establishment. This shift in authority from God to humans calls into question the authority of revelation. Revelation is no longer a window showing us God. It has become an artifact of human manufacture, a mirror showing us the human mind. And one might think that was the end of it. Even theologians spoke of the death of God and the rise of the secular city in the 1960s. After all, if humans are the ultimate source of authority and revelation is simply a human artifact interpreted by humans, then why not dispense with it altogether? And yet, it hasn't worked out that way. And looking at the Qur'an as authority and how it is authorized in the Muslim community will help us both understand our Muslim neighbors and perhaps ourselves as well. From the beginning of Islam, the Qur'an authorized itself. When God wills it, the Qur'an presents itself to the hearer as an overwhelming experience of something that can neither originate in nor be contained by the human mind. This is the experience that Muhammad reported having, and it is an experience both shared and expected by Muslims throughout history. The contemporary writer, Syed Hussein Nasr, writes in his introduction to Islamic spirituality of a sonoral revelation. He tells how the sound of the Quran being recited, heard more deeply than mere comprehension of the words, can elicit belief in God. Hassan Askari tells of his grandmother, who, although she could not read, felt that the open text of the Quran spoke directly to her. When I was living in the Muslim world, I heard from people who had that experience. They didn't understand a word of Arabic, but hearing the Quran chanted, they immediately knew they had encountered God. The takeaway is simple. Revelation is, for those whom God chooses to reveal God's self, both self-authenticating and self-authorizing. It reveals itself as the medium of a direct experience of God. It needs no further argument. But in Islam, this isn't the end of the story. For the Muslim community, the authority of the Quran isn't dependent on individual experiences. The revelation both forms and authorizes a community built around it. In Islam, this is the Ummah. The Quran authorizes the community to both confirm its authority and to interpret its meaning. So even those who do not have the primal experience of an encounter with God through the Quran can be confident of its authority because the community attests to it. In Islamic theology, this principle is called ijma, or consensus, and it is affirmed by a saying of the Prophet Muhammad, "My community will never agree on an error." Now, this idea that a community authorizes confidence in a self-authorizing revelation that forms the community will seem to the modern mind a bit circular. Doesn't this place authority in the hands of humans after all? Well, it would, except that generation by generation, the primal experience is renewed within the community. In Islam, as in other religions, the primal experience is always available and is constantly reiterated in community worship. Contemporary Muslims can stand metaphorically with Abu Bakr and Omar in prayer at the Kaaba, just as Christians can stand with the disciples at the foot of the cross and Jews can gather at Mount Sinai. Our respective revelations are what the Christian theologian David Tracy calls classics, timeless and universal windows into the transcendent. Yet the understanding of authority in Islam goes beyond primal self-authorization and even the consensus of the community. God, as revealed in the Qur'an, has endowed humans with three additional things beyond the Qur'an and the wisdom of the Ummah that I have already mentioned. God has given humans the unique insight of the Prophet Muhammad into the meaning of the Qur'an, the Hadith. God has also revealed God's nature in the created order. And God has given humans reason as the ability to both interpret the natural order and the revelation of the Qur'an. These then suggest a method for authorizing all religious knowledge. That method uses reason to interpret the meaning of the Qur'an in coordination with the Hadith of the Prophet Muhammad, the wisdom of the Muslim community over time, and the careful observation of nature. The agreement of these four with the primal experience of the Qur'an serves to authorize the beliefs and practices of the Islamic community, not only at prayer, but in every aspect of daily life. From a non-Muslim perspective, we could say that the primal self-authentication and self-authorization of the Qur'an in direct human experience authorizes this entire secondary process of authorization that sustains the life of the community as a whole. It authorizes for the community a coherent body of authentic knowledge of God. What I have sketched about Islam isn't so very different from authority in other religions, such as Christianity. All are characterized by both primal experiences of a self-authorizing revelation and the authority of the community formed around that experience and refined through reason, observation, and consensus. We are inclined in modern times to refer to the primal experience of comprehending the truth as insight, as if we were outside reality looking in, or even outside ourselves and looking in. But how did we get there? How did our minds free themselves from our brains? Revelation, as understood by Islam and other religions, is the experience of being simultaneously placed within the natural world and within ourselves, and then being lifted out to see that which transcends both ourselves and the world, God. For believers, the human mind is no longer closed in on itself and its experience of the world. The human mind is a window through which to gaze down at ourselves within the natural world and up to the divine, disclosing itself. That the mind is particularly suited to take on this role simply demonstrates, in light of the experience of revelation, that it is made in the image of the one who created it for this very purpose. I'm Robert Hunt. This is Muslim Faith and Values. Follow us on YouTube. Check us out at Interfaith Encounters. Watch for a series of podcasts coming up soon on Interfaith Encounters, where I'll be interviewing leaders of different religious communities about the COVID-19 crisis. Thank you.